Before we jump into the story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Have you ever found yourself in a situation so shocking that it made you question everything you thought you knew about your family? A moment where something felt deeply wrong, but you couldn't bring yourself to stop it? I found myself in one of those situations, and trust me, I wish I could say it was all just a nightmare. But it wasn't. It happened, and it still haunts me. My mom, Megan, asked me to do something with our dog, Charlie, and I didn't just comply. I was caught on camera doing something I could never undo. It's something I can't erase from my memory, no matter how hard I try. I know what you're probably thinking. What could be so bad? Well, hang on. By the time I'm done, you'll understand why I felt compelled to share this with you. It's one of those things you won't believe until you hear it all. My name is Jordan, and up until that moment, I thought I had a pretty normal family. I grew up in a household where things seemed simple, or at least that's how I saw it. My mom, Megan, was the kind of person who always got things done. She had a way of making everyone around her fall in line and follow her lead without question. If she asked for something, it was done. No one ever really said no to her. And for the longest time, I thought that was just how things were. She was the mom. After all, she always knew best. But everything changed one night. We had a dog named Charlie, a goofy, loyal golden retriever who was more like a brother to me than a pet. He was the dog who had always been there when I needed someone to talk to. His big brown eyes, his wagging tail, his silly antics, they brought comfort and joy to my life. He was innocent pure, and I never imagined I would be put in a situation where I'd feel as though I was betraying that bond. It started harmless enough. My mom asked me to help with Charlie, and at first it didn't seem like a big deal. But as I stood there looking down at Charlie and then back at my mom, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was a strange sensation building inside me. It was like my gut was telling me that something wasn't right, even though nothing had happened yet. The way she spoke to me, her tone, it wasn't the calm, soothing voice I was used to. There was a sharpness, a quiet intensity that made my skin prickle. At the time, I brushed it off. After all, she was my mom, and when your mom asks you for help, you help, right? So despite the uneasy feelings settling in my stomach, I nodded and walked over to Charlie, who was wagging his tail in his usual cheerful way, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Then things took a turn I could never have predicted. As I knelt beside Charlie, my mom's eyes turned cold. I don't think I had ever seen that look on her face before. It wasn't anger. It was something else, something I couldn't quite grasp, but it chilled me to my core. She stepped closer, and I could feel the weight of her gaze like a physical force pressing down on me. There was a heavy silence, and then she said, "This is the only way, Jordan." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. They weren't a request. They were a command. There was finality in her voice, and it sent a wave of panic crashing through me. I froze. My heart started racing in my chest, my hands trembling as I stood there, unsure of what was happening, unsure of what she was asking. What did she mean by that? I tried to piece it together, but the pieces didn't fit. Before I could even form a coherent thought, she motioned toward the camera. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The camera. It was already rolling, capturing every moment. I hadn't even noticed it before, but now it was impossible to ignore. I was caught in a moment that felt like a dream, but it was so real, so terrifying. I felt like I was outside myself, watching everything happen, but unable to stop it. My body was paralyzed. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Every part of me screamed to stop, to walk away, to grab Charlie and leave the room. But my legs were frozen. My mind was racing, but it was as if my body had betrayed me. I was stuck, caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape from. And then my mom spoke again. What she asked of me was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It was a request that, in my wildest nightmares, I never would have thought she was capable of. She told me to be intimate with Charlie, and that she would be watching. The words hit me like a physical blow. I could hardly breathe. My mind went numb, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. This had to be some sort of sick joke. There was no way this could be happening. But as I stood there, staring into my mom's cold, unfeeling eyes, I realized with horror that I hadn't misheard her. This was real. This was really happening. I felt like I was choking. My chest tightened and my breath caught in my throat. The camera was still there, recording, capturing every second of my absolute horror. There was no escape. I could feel it, watching, documenting my every move. At first, I thought maybe this was some twisted prank. But as I looked at my mom, I saw no trace of humor, no sign that this was anything but a cruel, horrifying reality. She wasn't joking. She wasn't asking. She was ordering me. The look in her eyes, that icy resolve, made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. "Do it, Jordan," she said, her voice low and flat. Her tone was not one of a mother trying to help, but one of a person who had already made up their mind and expected me to follow through without question. The weight of what she was asking pressed down on me, suffocating me. My thoughts spun wildly, desperately trying to make sense of it all, but everything felt wrong. I looked at Charlie, our family dog, my friend, the one who had always been there for me, and I saw nothing but confusion in his eyes. His tail wagged nervously as if he sensed the tension in the air, but he didn't understand what was happening. And I could see it too, his innocence, his trust in me, and yet I was about to shatter that trust. The love I had for him was drowning in a wave of guilt and betrayal. I wasn't just letting myself down. I was betraying him, betraying everything I had ever believed in. I was trapped in a nightmare, and there was no escape. I was being forced into a situation I could never forget, something that would be forever etched in my mind, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. My body felt as though it had turned to stone. Every inch of me was heavy, immobile. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to somehow break free from this hellish moment. But I was paralyzed, completely frozen in place. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. My mother stood there, unmoving, watching me with an unsettling calmness. It was as though she was observing me from a distance, waiting to see if I would comply, if I would submit to her will. Her eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of warmth or understanding. The intensity of her gaze seemed to amplify my sense of entrapment, making it feel like I was suffocating under the weight of her presence. I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't even summon the strength to take a step back. I just stood there, my body trembling uncontrollably, as the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family, my life, and my identity shattered into pieces. The world around me felt distorted, unreal, as if I was standing in the eye of a storm that I couldn't escape. The only sound I could hear was the rapid pounding of my own heart, echoing in my ears, and my breath, short, shallow, panicked, coming in ragged bursts. It was like I was slowly drowning in this moment, sinking deeper into a chasm of confusion and terror. I could feel myself losing touch with reality, with my sense of self. My mind tried desperately to make sense of it, to find a way out, but there was nothing. I was trapped in this nightmare, unable to wake up. The camera, still rolling, captured everything. My mother's unblinking, emotionless stare, Charlie's confused look, his innocent eyes that had once filled me with comfort and love. All of it was burned into my consciousness, replaying over and over like a never-ending loop. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. And when it was finally over, I felt as though I was standing in the aftermath of a storm that had ripped through my life, leaving nothing in its wake but utter destruction. The room was eerily quiet, almost too quiet, save for the persistent hum of the camera that had recorded every second of my horror. My mother, Megan, stood there, watching me with that same cold detachment, her lips curling into a faint smile. It wasn't a smile of joy or satisfaction, but something else, something darker. She looked as though what had just happened was completely normal, if there was nothing out of the ordinary about it at all. That faint smile chilled me to my core. It made me question everything I had ever known about her, about our family and self. How could I have been so blind? How could I have been so naive to think that things were just as they seemed? I couldn't trust my memories anymore, couldn't trust the woman who had always been my mother. My legs felt weak, like they might collapse under me at any moment. I stumbled toward the nearest chair and sank into it, my head spinning. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened, but it was like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces. I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't find a way to justify it. The horror and confusion surged through me in waves, leaving me gasping for air, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos that had just become my reality. What had just happened? Was it even real? Or had I somehow, in some twisted way, imagined it all? The doubts clawed at me, gnawing at the edges of my mind, but no matter how much I tried to deny it, the truth remained. The truth of what I had done, what had been forced upon me, and the fact that the entire moment had been captured, recorded, preserved for eternity. I looked up at my mother, still standing there, seemingly unaffected by everything that had just transpired. Her eyes met mine, and I saw nothing but cold indifference. There was no remorse, no sign of any emotion beyond satisfaction. She didn't even seem to realize the depth of the destruction she had just caused. She was the same person she had always been, or so I thought, but now I was questioning if I had ever truly known her at all. I wanted to scream, to cry, to erase the memory of everything. But instead, I just sat there, frozen in a numb state, overwhelmed by the suffocating weight of what I had just done. My mind screamed for release, yet my body refused to respond. Every muscle felt like it was made of stone. I couldn't move, couldn't react. I was trapped inside myself, lost in a sea of guilt, confusion, and horror. Charlie, our loyal golden retriever, trotted over to me, his tail wagging cautiously as if he sensed my distress and was trying to comfort me. He nuzzled against my leg, his soft fur brushing against my skin, but I couldn't even look at him without feeling a deep, searing guilt that tore through me. His eyes, filled with innocence, only made it worse. He didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew. I knew how badly I had failed him. The bond we once had felt shattered, and every time I looked at him, I saw nothing but my betrayal. Megan's words echoed relentlessly in my mind. Her commanding tone, her icy gaze as she watched me so intently, waiting for me to comply, pushing me further than I ever thought I could go. She had tested me, manipulated me, and I had let it happen. I kept thinking about the moment, how I stood there frozen, unable to say no, unable to do anything but follow her orders. The weight of it all crushed me from the inside out, and I couldn't escape it. I felt utterly betrayed, not just by Megan, but by myself. How had I allowed this to happen? How had I let myself be swept into this madness? Why didn't I fight back, say no, or just walk away? The questions swirled endlessly in my mind, but there were no answers. Only the growing void of guilt, a pit that seemed to deepen with every passing second, threatening to consume me entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the images played over and over in my mind. Her face, her smile, her unsettling calmness. It was as if she had done nothing wrong, as if she had simply carried out some mundane task. The way she acted, the way she stood there, watching me like it was all just part of some twisted game. And then there was Charlie, his confused expression, his innocence now tainted by my actions. The memory of his face, the confusion, the hurt, the fear, was burned into my mind, an image I couldn't erase, no matter how hard I tried. It was unbearable. I could not escape it. Every time I closed my eyes, it was all I saw. The weight of it followed me like a shadow, an ever-present reminder of the nightmare I had lived through. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. It was real. In the days that followed, I tried to push everything to the back of my mind. I told myself that if I just ignored it, if I could just pretend like everything was fine, it would eventually fade away. But the guilt never left me. It gnawed at me from the inside, unrelenting and insidious, taking root in every part of my life. I couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate. I avoided Megan as much as I could, but her presence lingered in every corner of the house. Every time I saw her, it was like I could hear her voice in my head again, cold and commanding, telling me what to do. And Charlie, every time I looked at him, I felt a sharp pang of sadness, a deep sense of shame. His eyes no longer just reflected trust and loyalty. Now they seemed to carry a question I couldn't answer. How could I ever make this right? How could I undo what I had done? I didn't know how to move forward, didn't know where to begin to process what had happened. I didn't even know who I was anymore. The weight of the betrayal, of the guilt, stayed with me. Every moment, every step I took, felt like I was walking through a fog, lost in a world that no longer made sense. How could I possibly go back to the way things were? How could I face Megan, face myself, knowing what had transpired? There was no clear path forward, no easy way to reconcile what I had been forced to do. All I could do was survive the days, trying to hold it all together, trying to ignore the darkness that had crept into my life. But I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. But then, I made a mistake. I went back to the footage. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I thought that watching it again would help me make sense of what had happened. Or maybe I was just punishing myself, trying to understand the depth of the horror I had experienced. But what I found, what I uncovered, changed everything in ways I couldn't have anticipated. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. At first, it seemed like the same awful scene playing out on the screen, the moment I'd been trying to escape from. The same sense of dread, the same confusion and paralysis. But then, as I looked closer, I noticed something, a small detail in the background, something I hadn't seen in the chaos of the moment, something that made my blood run cold, something that sent a chill creeping up my spine. It wasn't just what Megan had made me do, it was why she had made me do it. As I watched the footage on my laptop, my hands shook uncontrollably. I felt like I was holding a portal to the most traumatic moment of my life, a window into a nightmare I could never escape. Yet, something inside me compelled me to examine it closer, to scrutinize every frame, even though I could feel my soul screaming for me to look away. The video was burned into my memory, a brand that wouldn't fade, no matter how hard I tried to block it out. But then, something new caught my eye, something I hadn't noticed in the frenzy of that moment. In the video, Megan was standing in the corner, partially obscured by shadows. At first, it seemed like she was just a passive observer, her face hidden in the gloom. But as the seconds passed, her expression began to come into sharper focus. What seemed like a mother's watchful gaze, full of concern and care, slowly morphed into something far more unsettling. The more I studied her face, the more I realized it wasn't a concern I was seeing. It was something darker, something calculating. She wasn't just watching me, she was waiting for something. And not just waiting, she was anticipating. No, she was orchestrating. Every movement, every word, every second of what had happened. She had been in complete control. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and my pulse quickened. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to pause the video to steady myself. I rewound the footage over and over, hoping, praying that I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into her expression. But no, there it was clear as day. Her smirk, brief and almost imperceptible, appeared right after I hesitated. It was as if she wanted me to falter, to doubt myself, to feel trapped, to lose all sense of control. The more I watched, the clearer it became. She wasn't just directing events from a distance, she was enjoying it. She was savoring every moment of my discomfort, my confusion, my helplessness. And that smile, it wasn't just satisfaction. It was something more sinister. It was a triumph. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. I had to understand, had to know why she had done this to me. I rewound again and again, my mind racing, desperate for some explanation. But the more I saw, the less sense it made. And then something even worse emerged, something that froze my blood in my veins. In the corner of the room, just slightly visible, was a second camera. It was positioned on a bookshelf, barely noticeable, hidden in plain sight, but unmistakably pointed right at me. My heart felt like it stopped. One camera was already recording the entire room, capturing everything. So why would she need another? Why 2 cameras? I paused the footage and leaned in closer, scanning the background with a growing sense of dread. That's when I saw it, Megan's laptop, sitting just out of frame, its lid slightly open. My stomach churned. The laptop had been there the entire time, and I hadn't even noticed it. What was it doing there? What was she doing with it? I replayed the scene in my mind, trying to remember if she had ever touched it or if she had used it for anything. But no, there had been no indication. Yet now, seeing it on the screen, I couldn't ignore it. The second camera, the laptop, it all added up to something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Megan hadn't just been recording me. She had been filming for someone else. Someone else who needed to see every second, every detail. Someone she had intended to show the footage to. My mind raced, spinning with questions I had no answers for. Who was the second camera for? Who was she working with? And why had she kept it all from me? Was there someone else involved in this? Someone I hadn't even realized? As my thoughts spiraled out of control, I was hit with a horrifying realization. I wasn't just trapped in this nightmare. I was being played and manipulated in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. My breath caught when I saw a file on the screen labeled Untitled Encore Video 01. It was the same name the recording had automatically saved under. I froze, my mind racing. Was she editing the footage? Was she planning on sharing it? The thought alone made my stomach churn. The weight of the moment hit me like a ton of bricks. All the pieces started falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. I couldn't help but think back to the past week. The hush phone calls, the strange, coded conversations I'd overheard when Megan thought I wasn't listening. The way she had become increasingly secretive, always retreating to her room and spending hours behind that computer. It had all seemed strange at the time, but I had convinced myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But now, in the cold light of the truth, I saw it for what it was. Every odd behavior, every shift in her demeanor, everything I had brushed off as coincidence, was now part of a much darker picture. I remember one night asking her what she was doing, and her response still haunted me. Even then, "You'll understand soon enough," she had said with a cryptic smile. I had dismissed it as just one of her usual, weird remarks. But now, in the aftermath of everything, I realized it wasn't harmless. It was a warning, a chilling, prophetic statement I had ignored. I felt my pulse quicken, my thoughts spiraling further into a pit of dread. Who was this for? Was she planning on showing the footage to someone else? Was she going to sell it? Or was this some sick, twisted game to see how far she could push me, how much control she could wield over me? Each possibility seemed more grotesque than the last, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. But what made it worse, what gnawed at me more than anything, was Charlie. I paused the footage and stared at him, his wide, innocent eyes reflecting nothing but confusion. He had trusted me, and I had betrayed that trust. Even if I had felt paralyzed, even if I had believed I had no choice, the weight of that guilt was suffocating. He had been there for me, always loyal, loving, never asking for anything but affection in return. And I had let him down. The thought of his confusion, his trust, and the way I had allowed it all to crumble was too much to bear. But amidst the suffocating guilt, another feeling surged within me: anger. I was furious at Megan for what she had done to me, for what she had dragged me into, and for the way she had manipulated me into this horrible position. The anger built in my chest, hot and consuming. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I had to get away from the screen, from the footage, from the horrifying evidence of what had happened. But even as I tried to block it all out, the reality set in. This was over. My life had been turned upside down in ways I hadn't even begun to comprehend. And Megan's behavior, the hidden camera, the file on her laptop, they were all pieces of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle I wasn't ready to confront, but one that I knew deep down I had to. I had to know the truth. I had to know who Megan was and what she was planning next. The realization hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me. This wasn't just about me anymore. Megan wasn't just hiding a twisted secret from me. She was hiding something far darker, something far more dangerous. And I was just the beginning. What had I become a part of? What had I gotten myself into? I stood there in silence, my thoughts crashing against each other. And for the first time, I felt like I truly didn't know who my mother was. Megan had always been a force in my life, someone I admired, someone I trusted. But now, I saw her for what she was, a master manipulator, a woman who had been carefully crafting something so dark, so sinister, that I was only starting to grasp the full extent of it. And I was terrified of what she was planning to do next. As we reach the end of this journey, we've uncovered some truly dark and disturbing truths, and it's left us questioning everything we thought we knew about family, trust, and the lengths people will go to manipulate others. What have you learned from this story so far? How do you think you would have reacted in the same situation? I'd love to hear from you. Please share one thing you've learned from this experience and how it might change the way you approach trust, relationships, or difficult situations in your life. Leave your comment below, and let's keep this conversation going. If you found this video impactful, don't forget to leave your comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that explore the complexities of life. Your support means everything. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay aware, stay strong, and never underestimate the power of your own choices.